Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Jen. Today I'm taking you out in my backyard before we start our canning session. I'm a really big fan of having meals in a jar or foods that are able to be prepared at a moment's notice. That's why I love canning. I've recently retired and taken up canning, and I'm really enjoying every minute of it. I love to spend time in the kitchen. I love to develop and refine my recipes. So one afternoon of cooking and you can produce, say, 7 jars for 7 meals. So it's really a productive way to spend your time. I feel it's a very efficient use of time. I have a lot more free time to use during the week for other things. When I can a day or two a week, my food is ready to go and it's great. So I haven't done a video for over a week. Well, I did do a video, but unfortunately it was a flop. I saw some videos on YouTube talking about canning Dijon chicken. Now, Dijon chicken is one of my favorite meals. And so I saw a couple different recipes and I thought I'd try one of them. So the lady who produced or developed the recipe was putting maybe about a half a jar of chicken, and then she was making a mustard broth and canning the chicken and then pouring the mustard broth over it. And I thought, well, that looks pretty simple. Let me try doing that. So I canned it up, and I took out a jar yesterday. I filmed the whole process. I took a jar out yesterday to thicken it up and to serve it. My daughter-in-law was visiting, and it was no good. I mean, it didn't even taste mustardy at all. The chicken had very little flavor. I followed her instructions to a T, and I thought, and it was a lot of broth. It was more soupy than anything. I thought, this is not Chicken Dijon. Anybody cooking this and thinking they're eating some kind of a facsimile of Chicken Dijon is going to be sorely disappointed. So when I saw an online YouTube recipe for pressure canning Chicken Dijon, I was really excited, and then I was so disappointed that it didn't turn out as I had anticipated that it might. And I thought, well, I surely will be able to develop my own recipe for Chicken Dijon similar to the carnitas. I'm going to primarily fill it with meat. The meat, raw packing, the meat will make its own juice. I'll put the spices in there that I like. I'll heat some wine on the stove to burn off the alcohol, and use that for my liquid for canning. And if everything works as planned, you'll be seeing this video. So if you're seeing this, it means it worked out. So I hit my books. Now, the first book that everybody should have when they learn to can is the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. And this has all the tested recipes and tested guidelines. Although USDA has not tested anything since 1979, I recently found out. So anything, the basics are there. Like if you want to can simple ingredients, all your instructions are there. But if you want to do anything different, like combine ingredients in a jar to make a meal starter or a meal in a jar, you have to go elsewhere to look for instructions for that. They do have a few meal type ingredients such as chili con carne. I think they have a bean soup. They have spaghetti sauce instructions, but that's about it. There's very little. Another great book that's tried and true. They've had new editions come up for many years. The Ball Blue Book Complete Guide to Preserving. And it's got over 500 recipes. So this is definitely a step up for me. There are a lot of interesting recipes in here, and 500 recipes may sound like a lot, but there is no recipe in there for Dijon chicken. So I also picked up on Amazon Diane Devereaux's The Complete Guide to Pressure Canning, because of course all these meat and vegetable ingredients must be pressure canned. The only items that you can can in a water bath canner safely are fruits and pickled items. And if you want to can, a meal or any kind of meat or any kind of veggies, you've got to pressure can. So if you get the USDA Guide to Home Canning, and it's available on Amazon for like $10. You can read in there. It's got very complete instructions how to operate your canners, what type of foods to can using a water bath, what kind of foods to can using a pressure canner, and instructions on how to water bath and pressure can, times, the whole 9 yards. Everything is in there. So well worth your time to get that book. The information is also on the National Center for Home Food Preservation, nchfp.org, I want to say .com. But anyway, it's the NCHFP, and all the instructions are there, but it's just so much nicer to have it in a book where you can, mark it up. You could refer to it. You don't have to worry about having an internet connection. I also have an Amish canning guide, which I didn't bring that book out here with me, but that's a really good book for instructions for ingredient canning. And this book has quite a few recipes for meals in a jar. It's got a lot of soups and stews and let's see, how to can tomatoes and vegetables, beans and legumes, stock, broth, soup and stews, poultry, meat and game, and meals in a jar. And she's got about, I would say, 15 or 20 meals in a jar. The issue that I have with the meals in a jar, I like to do it as simply as possible. And for me, that generally means raw pack and add my fresh ingredients and let the canner do the cooking for me. And I find that that does a great job when I'm canning. My beef stews are awesome. They're wonderful. I've made carnitas in a jar. It's just divine. I liked a lot of her meal in a jar recipes, but she almost extensively takes the meat, cubes it and browns it, and then cooks the liquid portion or the vegetable portion on the stove, and then combines everything before she pressure cans. And I wanted to refine that a little bit because I prefer the ease and the good fresh flavor. It's not so overcooked when you do a raw pack method. So I'm going to get my meat, my spices, and I'm going to fill my jars as if I were raw packing, which I will be. This is an untested recipe. Most canning is recommended to be done using tested and approved recipes from the USDA or the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So as I said before, don't take my word for any of this. Do your own homework, do your own studying, consult experts that you know are expert at canning. Perhaps they're master canners, and just do your homework and feel comfortable with what you're doing. This recipe is going to be something I personally developed. I'm certainly no expert and no master canner, so bear that in mind. I've done a lot of extensive research and I'm very comfortable with this recipe, but I want you to be comfortable too, and to make sure you know that it's going to be safe for you and your family. And so that means you've got to do your own study and research. Another thing that I'm going to do today, I'm going to make Chicken Dijon. I'm going to make 4 pint jars, and I'm going to use my Instant Pot Max to can. And the newer electric canners have never been tested officially by USDA or by the extensions. So that's another thing. You have to be sure you do your research, that you're comfortable using the electric canner if you want to use one. Now, you could certainly take the recipe that I'm showing you and use a regular stovetop canner if that's what you have. But I'm going to be showing you using my Instant Pot Max. It's very simple to use and I love it. And I'm very comfortable using it. I've seen another lady on YouTube, Rose Red Homestead, who has done testing at her altitude for her particular things that she has canned, her particular items that she has canned. She tested with the data logger, which monitors the temperature inside the jars, not just inside the canner. And she's done several test runs, and that particular canner has passed with flying colors. So I feel very comfortable using it myself. But like I said, do your homework, get your books and your reference information, and make sure you know what you're doing. And if you are seeing this video, that means that this recipe came out well, and I'm happy with it, and I'm showing it to you. I did not, I had to throw away my other video of the Dijon chicken. That was, it was just no good. Sorry to say, but hopefully this one will be better. So let's get into the kitchen and let's get started. I have my ingredients assembled here. Of course, we're going to need chicken. I'm going to cut this up into 1-inch cubes. You can use white meat or dark meat. We have shallots here, sort of a cross in flavor between onion and garlic, so I'm going to chop these up. We also have some garlic. Mustard, you can use Dijon mustard like you would spread in a sandwich, or you could use ground mustard. For spices, we're going to be using rosemary, parsley, and thyme. I've got onion powder because I like the flavor of onion. I'm going to add a little bit of turmeric because I think it'll give it a good color and flavor, and it'll enhance the eye appeal of the dish and also give it better nutrition. Turmeric's really good for you. We've got a nice white wine. I'm using Pinot Grigio, but you could use Chardonnay, or you could just use whatever white table wine you've got. We have our 4 pint jars here. I've washed them, rinsed the lids. I don't have to heat the jars because I'm going to be raw packing, so they're just room temperature. I've got my canner ready to go. This is the only model of Instant Pot. It's the Max. It's the only Instant Pot that's got a canning function. None of the others can be used for canning. So if you have a regular Instant Pot, don't even think about canning in it. It won't work. Okay, so let me get my meat and veggies cut up and we'll be right back. I just thought I'd show you this. I was kind of amused. This is a bottle of wine that cost $2.99. It came with the cork. Doesn't look like a natural cork, but cork nonetheless, so I thought that was kind of sweet. No screw top wine for this house. Difficult to do with one hand, but there you see it in action. Success. So I'm going to have these filled about 3/4 of the way, so each is going to lack about a half a cup. So I'm going to use about a cup and a half of white wine. And I'm going to just put it in the saucepan. There's a cup. It's a very generous cup here. I'm going to cook this down for just a few minutes while we're filling the jars with chicken. Got my chicken chunked up here. No bigger than 1-inch chunks, because you don't want big, huge hunks on your plate. Bite size is best. Okay, we're going to get the chicken in the jars. I'll take you along to watch. Found a way to prop my camera on my lower kitchen shelf here. So we like our food meaty and we like it full of flavor. So that is how we're going to fix this dish. Very meaty and very full of flavor. So we want them about 3/4 of the way full, each jar. Each pint holds 2 cups or 1 pound of chicken, so that's why I bought 3 pounds of chicken, so that I could have a little bit of extra room. I didn't put a whole pound in each jar, but I wanted a little extra room for the other ingredients. Okay, so these are about 3/4 of the way full. I've chopped up 4 medium shallots. I'm going to put one of these measuring dishes. It's about 1/4 of a cup in each jar. So about 1/4 a cup of shallot. Oops, I had an escapee there. Now we'll add our dry ingredients. I'm going to give each jar a 1/4 teaspoon of rosemary, a 1/4 teaspoon of parsley, an 1/8 of a teaspoon or a dash of turmeric. I guess I should be putting these this way. So far we have used parsley, dried parsley, 1/4 teaspoon of rosemary, a 1/8 of a teaspoon or a dash of turmeric, another 1/4 teaspoon of thyme, and I decided to use granulated garlic instead of fresh garlic, so I'm going to use about a 1/4 teaspoon of that per jar. We're going to give it a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder per jar. Now if you don't have shallots and you don't want to use shallots, you could just put a little more onion and garlic powder in. Now the USDA book, when talking about raw pack, does not mention putting any broth in. In fact, they specifically advise you to just pack it raw and not add any broth. However, in the Ball Book of Home Preserving, they do mention you can raw pack and add spices and broth. So I am going to add, for my liquid, a little bit of the boiled white wine. I am going to add a teaspoon of Dijon mustard to each jar. Now if you don't have Dijon mustard, you could certainly use ground mustard. You would only need probably a 1/2 of a teaspoon if you're using this powdered ground mustard. Well, it's heading over to the side of the jar there. Doesn't matter, it's all going to cook down into one beautiful, lovely dish. So about a teaspoon of your Dijon mustard in each jar. And you'll notice the Dijon mustard is a little milder in flavor than the yellow mustard you might be familiar with from sandwiches, so it's not quite as overpowering. So this has simmered for a few minutes. I'm going to let it cool now. Pretty much the alcohol burns off right away when you heat it up. I'm going to get my trusty chopstick. I love these. I use them for quite a bit when I'm canning, and just kind of move that away from the edge of the jar. I guess I could have put the spices and everything in before I put the shallots. That would have probably worked out a little more nicely. Okay, so we're going to get our wine that we've simmered, and we're going to fill the jars with to 1.25 inches of headspace. And here we go. We're going to use our whatever debubbler you use to debubble the jars. And after you debubble, you may have to add a little more liquid, because it's going to sink down into the jar. We don't want to add too much. These chicken breasts are going to release a lot of liquid when they cook. Okay. So you can mix these as vigorously or not, as you prefer. I'm going to mix them down a little bit to try to get all the contents kind of down there in the jar. Okay. Okay, believe me, this is going to make plenty of its own broth and sauce for you to thicken up later with some cream and pour over your rice, potatoes, pasta, however you want to serve this. We're going to get a moistened towel to wipe down the tops and the edges where the rings thread on. I wished I had 4 wide mouth pints. I only had 3 wide mouths, so I had to use 1 regular mouth pint. Okay, I'm going to get that away from the edge there, because that little bit of spice could creep up over the edge and prevent a seal. I don't want that. I've had that happen before. Had just a little piece of parsley or garlic or something just kind of go up over the edge, and my jar didn't seal. So I'm real careful about getting it all away from the edge as much as possible. All right, the next step, now that we've cleaned the rims, is to put our lids on. The flat and the ring. Just finger tight. Not too tight. You need to leave these a little bit, just barely tight, because during the canning process, you want whatever air is in the jar to be able to vent out. The food will expand while it's cooking. The air will vent out, and then when you take the jars out of the canner to cool, the lack of air in there and the food cooling will create the suction that seals the jar down. Okay, into our canner. Now you have to follow your canner instructions. Make sure you've got enough water in the base of your pressure canner. It depends on the model of what you're canning with. For this canner, I need to have water come about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way up the jars, and it does. So let's get the lid on and we'll start processing. So it makes that little noise to let you know that the lid is in place. Okay, we are going to select. See, now this gives me a continuous readout of the temperature that's inside the canner. Right now it's at 75 degrees. We're going to select canning. I have pints and it's chicken, so meat has to cook for 1 hour and 15 minutes. This is the target temperature. The pressure is on max, and we are going to let this vent naturally, so no quick release. It's going to be a slow release. And start. And that's all there is to this canner. So this will bring itself up to the proper temperature. When the steam begins to build, it's going to automatically vent steam in there until the steam has come out, and then it will start the timing automatically. So I don't have to do anything with this. I can literally just walk away. But I'm going to walk away with a glass of Pinot Grigio, and I will see you all later. Okay, our hour and 15 minutes is finished. We're now on the cool down period. We're 2 minutes into cool down. The temperature of the canner is right now 247 degrees inside. We have a natural pressure release, so this is going to depressurize naturally. It'll take about an hour to an hour and a half. When it's through, this red light will turn off. The pin here will drop, and then we'll be able to open the canner and remove the jars. But it takes approximately 1 to 1.5 hours for that process to complete. And we want it to be slow because we don't want any kind of siphonage from the jars. So we'll be back when the canner has cooled down. Okay, our red light has turned off. We can now safely remove the lid. Of course, we'll tilt it away from ourselves so that we don't get a face full of steam. Looks pretty nice. Let's get our jars out of the canner. Looks good, smells good. Now you want to remove these straight up and over because the jars have not sealed yet. If you tilt them, you might have liquid come out through the lid, and that would interfere with the eventual seal. Okay. So I'm going to let these cool overnight. And we will come back and see in the morning how they are. They're bubbling inside the jars, which is generally a good sign. Every jar. So nice. Okay, we'll see you back here in the morning. Here we are the next morning. Everything looks good. Everything's sealed. I love the nice yellow color. That little bit of turmeric really gives it a nice curb appeal there. And let us take off the rings. Get those washed up. I like to get the rings washed up as soon as possible and dried so that they don't get, see there's a little bit of grease there from a little bit of siphonage, so that they don't get rusty. You cannot put these through the dishwasher. They will get rusty if you do that. You have to hand wash them. As soon as they're washed, you need to hand dry them thoroughly. So we had a nice successful canning session, and we'll come back when we have one of these for our dinner tonight. I can't wait to try it. All right, so the jars have been washed. I've marked the name, the date, and that I pressure canned for 75 minutes, just so I'll remember. And I'm going to put these three away, these three wide mouth jars away. We're going to have this one for dinner. You can see, even though I primarily pack this about 2/3 to 3/4 full of chicken, it's got plenty of broth that we can make a nice sauce to go with our dinner. So let's pop the lid. Nice pop there. Okay, I'm going to just kind of measure out how much liquid I had from this canning session in this jar. Just for my own information. So we're measuring out about how much liquid we have in this jar. Because by the time I add a little bit of half and half to this, it's going to double in the amount of liquid that we have. So we've got about a half cup of liquid here, and we're going to add another half cup, so we're going to have a full cup of gravy. Let's get this all into the pan, get it warmed up. Here's our chicken and shallots. Very nice. I'm going to just add the liquid back in. I just wanted to measure it for our own information to know about how much liquid we had there. Going to turn on the heat. And we're going to let this warm for just a minute, and we'll be right back. Then to this mixture, we are going to add about a half of a cup of half and half. That will make it very nice and creamy. You can see we've got plenty of sauce here, plenty. As soon as this warms through, we're going to come back and add the cornstarch, and then we'll be ready to eat. So after I tasted this, I was dissatisfied with the small amount of taste of the mustard. So I'm going to adjust the recipe. Instead of just 1 teaspoon of mustard in the jar, I'm going to advise 2 teaspoons of mustard per jar. And also I added just a little teaspoon of honey, because I think it helps to counteract the sharpness of the mustard. All right, so our sauce is boiling pretty good, pretty nicely. We're going to add 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. Just add it right in there. Depending on how thick you like this, if you want it much thicker, you could probably add a tablespoon, but I think 2 teaspoons is probably going to be all that's required. This looks so good. I honestly cannot wait to eat it. It should be thickening up here pretty quickly with the addition of that cornstarch. And you don't need to make a cornstarch slurry. You can just add the cornstarch right in, as I did. You can see there are no lumps or bumps in this. If you prefer to fix this using flour, you can use Wondra flour. You can make a roux before you add the contents of the jar onto the stove. But I just think the easiest method is to use cornstarch. Plus, I have a family member who cannot tolerate gluten. I have a family member on a gluten-free diet, so I sort of tend to just resort to using cornstarch automatically in my cooking lately. And I like mine a little bit thicker, so I'm going to add a little bit more cornstarch. This is not quite as thick as I like my sauce. So actually in my recipe, I'm going to adjust the directions to ask you to add a tablespoon of cornstarch. That is getting a little bit better. Of course, the longer you cook it, the thicker it will become. I don't want it too soupy, I want it nice and thick. So we've been boiling this for 3 or 4 minutes. It's starting to thicken up nicely. I think we're about there, so let's get this plated up. So we have our salad, a little bit of mashed potatoes. Going to add the Chicken Dijon to our plate here. It looks wonderful. And there it is. Dinner for 2 in just about 5 minutes. Serve that to my husband, he's going to love it. All right, I hope you enjoy this recipe. I'll have all the revisions in the printed recipe down below. Take care, and we will talk to you all again next time. All righty, bye-bye.